Here we go. So part of what we talked about was remembering to set the frame really clearly as a way to provide that bit of structure and safety that's intended with these conversations. Another thing that we talked about is just in terms of timing and layout, that, okay, we had things scheduled up until Tuesday afternoon. And so that's going to be the last of this initial series. Then Wednesday afternoon, folks who are Patreon supporters are invited to have a meeting, which is really essentially the 1 month since we got this started. We have a monthly meeting to talk about building this as a movement. So we'll have that conversation on Wednesday. And then a week from today, we'll do a conversation that's open to everyone who's been on one of these calls and try to go a little bit deeper into really figuring out what we can do to bring out the best in them and make them keep happening. So for the time being, it's important, I think, to start us by thinking about what's important. So really holding on to some of these basic principles that can help us frame our discussion and frame our quiet contemplation. So I'm going to ask now if we can just drop into 2 minutes of silence and just sort of soak in where we are, what's going to be important, and then I'll bring Paul in to lead the conversation. So here we go. Thank you. So just a reminder as we go into this conversation that we are recording. We want to go as deep as we can go. And if you realize you're going to start talking about something that you wouldn't feel comfortable getting recorded, please let us know and we can pause the recording. Otherwise, at some point, hopefully we can get this recording up on YouTube. So, but I know, I think we all know each other at this point. So I trust that we're going to be able to really listen and really share as authentically and honestly as we can. So with those in mind, I'm going to stop the screen share and hand it over to Paul, who's going to lead us in an extension of yesterday's conversation and maybe a little bit deeper dive. So go ahead, Paul.
Okay, so some of you know, some of you probably don't. I was fairly enthusiastic and engaged with the Bernie Sanders 2020 campaign, and continue to believe that the grassroots activists who sort of make up the core of his support are very much pointing sort of the way to the future, because I have never seen, and I'm interacting with a lot of these people a fair amount of time, especially on Twitter. But I've really never seen so many people who are engaging reality directly, right? Which is very different. There are a lot of Americans still, it's surprising but true, who get their sense of what's real and important through a filter. Might be MSNBC, it might be the New York Times, might be any number of things. What they're not doing is kind of, Hannah Arendt called it thinking without a banister. What they're not doing is distancing themselves from broadcast prompts about what we're supposed to think is important. The Sanders people are not, for example, Trump reactive. They've stopped listening to whatever the latest out, it's like a given. Yes, he will continue to say depraved things that make us all recoil in horror, but sort of repeatedly noting it gets us no closer to a better future. So what I have loved about the Sanders people is this direct engagement, this willingness to do something that can feel lonely, which is taking responsibility for finding solutions to a crisis. And so some of what I mean about new beginnings and changing the conversation comes out of a very personal thing for me, because I felt some immediate relief when Sanders withdrew from the race, as well as grief. Relief in the sense that there are so many dumb conversations you wind up having when you're advocating not just for a direction of change, but a candidate. The whole horse race thing, there's so much dumbness built into it. And also so much of the idea that politics is about picking the right people to make decisions for us that we are incapable of making for ourselves, right? Now, my reading of reality for quite some time has been that there is no one who is going to make decisions for us that we would like. And that if decisions are going to be made that are in the public interest, it would have to be because the public is interested enough to demand it, and kind of recognizing that whatever we might have thought for much of our history, it turns out this democracy thing is not optional, and it's not a spectator sport. It turns out we actually There's almost no end to how bad and how crazy it can get if ordinary people are not doing what we're doing right now. So that's part of the context, is the conversation beyond the conventions of election cycles. I, of course, am no less determined today than I was yesterday that agenda, a lot of it, will be enacted. I am certainly no less determined that we will make very large changes in direction on the climate crisis, on energy, and the environment. So the question now is there a way that is natural for us to leave a lot of dead ends behind? So what are some dead ends that I mean? One dead end is capitalism as an escape from freedom. Now, there may be things that free markets are wonderful at doing, but what we mean by capitalism, really comes from John Locke as an answer to what he saw as a big problem in the 17th century with feudalism unraveling, right? Feudalism told people who they were in relation to everyone else, what their role was, what they were there to contribute by your family of origin. That was going away. Locke was not a big wealthy elite, but someone who lived exclusively among them. And so he had an interest in making sure that elites were still elites, in avoiding everyone deciding everything. And so by the time he's done, pretty much all the questions that feudalism used to solve, according to Locke, are now going to be solved by money. Money will decide. So I think money will decide as anything but a recipe for sort of ecocide. I think that's a dead end. We need to think now in a way that is very independent of money. The economy, that phrase, which is no older than the Great Depression, that phrase is a dead end and has to go. It is a way of not thinking about what we are saying, right? If the question is, what do we do to make the economy good? Well, we don't know what economy good means, but more importantly, we're not asking, what do we do to address real, urgent, pressing life questions? And the way it normally plays out in American politics is, well, we can't address those questions because if we did, it would upset the economy. So the economy, this sort of fictitious entity, needs to go. It is a dead end. And we need to think about taking Greta really seriously when she says we have to figure out what is required for survival, for life not to be horribly diminished beyond what it already has been. We have to figure that out, and then we build our politics around that. What we don't do, Greta says, is ask ourselves what is politically realistic, and then derive our solutions to existential threats from that little tiny bandwidth of possibility, which is always somewhere between the worst possible thing you could do and the next worst possible thing you could do. Right in there is what we mean by centrist. It's right in that niche between the worst and the next worst. So those are all, I realize, negative statements. That's about dead ends. But I mostly just want to kind of invite you into this, and I just want to mention one frame I think is really helpful. And that's from Hannah Arendt, who really kind of saved politics as a political thinker in the 20th century. Political thought is my background. And so Arendt says this wonderful thing that philosophy is kind of focused on mortality, on death as part of the human condition, that it looks at life sort of in retrospect and subjects the whole of life to mortal scrutiny in asking what ultimately matters. What is the ultimate significance of what I did? What ultimately do I care about? She said politics, on the other hand, arises from birth, from the condition of human existence she calls natality. And she says, because each human being is unique, with each birth, a new presence comes into the world, the beginning and beginner of something new, a someone where no one was before. And she says about the vital role of speaking and acting together about things larger than our personal lives. She says, with word and deed, we insert ourselves into the human world. And this insertion, she says, is like a second birth. That is kind of extending the sheer physical fact of our having arrived in the world, because being born doesn't take care of it if you're human. There is still a very real possibility that you will end your life without having really ever arrived in the world we share in common. So for Arendt, politics was not some ugly, dirty part of life that we only submit to because it's unfortunately necessary, but what is in fact this aspect of life that is where we are most free. And by the time you're done reading Arendt, you will think seriously about whether there is any other meaning to freedom than freedom in the context of deciding together about the terms under which we're going to live together. So what I am hoping is that we can, each of you can talk a little bit about where you see new beginnings as well as endings in the crises we are facing, both the COVID-19 crisis and the climate crisis. Those were just some thoughts of mine.
Thank you. Is there someone who's eager to step in and share what they're thinking about?
I'll jump in just really
Okay.
quickly to say that I think what I see in this crisis is that for the first time that I can think of, life was put above the economy. And I think that came from this deep-seated fear, even in the upper echelons. And so I don't know where this goes from here, because we've never been in a position that I'm aware of where the economy was subsumed to the fear of death. And so, you know, the 1% have always been sheltered, and now they realized apparently they're not, and their fear drove them to shut down the economy first. And I think that's unique. So I think that's a new beginning. I hope we can use it well. I just don't know where it goes.
I'd like to continue and respond to both of those open ends a little bit. Then, just in saying that, yeah, this is this extraordinary sort of wedge has been driven into the business as usual model. And Derek, I hadn't framed it in those terms of, oh yeah, the 1% went along with this in shutting down the economy. Not perfectly, not all together, not all at once, and there are consequences associated with that for sure. But you know, everywhere we keep seeing how quickly certain aspects of planetary health are rebounding because of shutting down this economy for a little bit. And, you know, and again, an incomplete shutdown even has made vast differences in air quality all over the world, water quality all over the world. Just think of what would happen if we could keep this pace of destruction as low as it is now, as opposed to what it was 2 months ago. While we figure out how to move forward and take care of people. And again, that fact, and Derek, you framed it so well, of we have discovered that it is possible to choose life over the economy. Then the next step is it possible to choose a good life over going back to the old economy and the old ways of trying to get to a good life? Because it's clear that those weren't serving us. It has been clear for decades before this crisis that those weren't serving us, that people were not any happier under this system, and obviously that it was leading to some kind of global catastrophe sooner or later. Climate extinction, pollinator loss, loss of fish in the oceans, and what that means for global protein consumption. I mean, you know, we were on the brink on so many different places. And again, I'm also noticing and aware that some of what this particular crisis has driven us to actually moves us away from a few places where we were doing some good and making some good solutions, especially in terms of waste and disposability, and a sharing economy where people used the same stuff all the time instead of having their own thing that sat idle most of the time. Certainly in the current circumstances is much harder now. You know, even the library model, which was all about that. Why have a book just sit on your shelf for years and years? Why not let other people read it when you're not reading it? Let's set up a system for that. But now that's not okay, because it involves people coming together and people touching things. Mm-hmm. So there is a tremendous opportunity, though, just because nobody can turn away from the fact that we chose to walk away from the old economy, and we did. maybe we thought we were only choosing it temporarily. Nonetheless, we accomplished something amazing with getting this many people to respond to a crisis and self-quarantine. I mean, wow, you know, another great victory for the hairless ape. I mean, this was amazing. This is like going to the moon. How did we manage this? You know, and we didn't do it perfect, but we can handle a lot more than we usually give ourselves credit for. All right. Who's next?
Well, I kind of wanted to mention, I was listening to Paul talking and some of the others of us talking about what this kind of opportunity is right now. And I'm not being, as I think I beat to death the theme that I didn't come from a particularly religious family, but I would say I came from a fairly ethical one, a fairly socially moral one. And I've heard most of my life that the real freedom, there's this old saying, I want to do God's will. And to some people's recollection, or not recollection, some people's estimation, that is the only real freedom, is to be a part of a cloth with what really is our destiny, not as though we can particularly note it. But the other freedom is the one Paul talked about. We were talking about it. He was talking to me about Hannah Arendt's idea about that politics is a temporal and very humane type of atmosphere, reality for us. And once we're engaged with each other in that, we actually create our own freedom. That is, I sort of consider politics at its best sort of a secular religion. That is, we have to have some basic good faith about our intentions, sort of like we do the meeting with you want to listen and think about these things seriously and take them deeply and know that you're part of the process. That to me is as much freedom as I can really imagine us realistically grasping. It's a big order. And because a lot of what we're talking about is this onslaught of brainwashing, really brainwashing. I think since World War II, at some point, the moneyed elites decided that the libertarian idea that money runs everything. It goes right in line with Locke's philosophy. And I don't really think you could even call it capitalism now. It's almost like it just has its own life that isn't necessarily even dependent on people anymore. It's sort of a mechanism now. And that's, a lot of people grow the economy, that's what Bill Clinton used to say. It's as though it's somehow just self-justified, self-evident. And I've never thought that it was. I could appreciate the argument that it has some element of creativity at its best, that has some element of maybe somebody's inventiveness will surprise us and kind of we'll delight in it, or it'll make something easier for us. But really at the heart of it, that's not what's running anything. Well, it is what's running stuff, but I think we're finding we're very unfree with money running things. And it's anti-life on the face of it. I think those things have been pretty clear to me almost all of my life. I'm 68, and I say for 50 years at least, I think it seems obvious to me that the road I thought we might take post 60s, and that it fell down and failed in many ways, and I was a part of that too. The road I was hoping we would take was the one that would liberate us from this illusion about the marketplace and money, because the marketplace should be a literal place you get something that nourishes your life, not a rule by a so-called invisible hand. The invisible hand, it's like the black hand of the mob or something. But it's really awful now that we have judges deciding that, yeah, people can stand in line to vote. The people who are really concerned about money are just fine with people. There's an old joke, Jack Benny he said he was held up by this robber, and the guy said, your money or your life. And Jack Benny just kind of stood there. And the guy goes, I said your money or your life. And Jack Benny said, I'm thinking. So that seems to be the place our culture is trying to, some of us are trying to rationalize, well, I'm still thinking about that. I'm not sure. Maybe it doesn't make any sense. So, and I hope enough people are waking up to that. But I think that's sort of an overly optimistic view. Again, I'm as weighed down as anyone else with what I've seen of our recent history. But this definitely is an opportunity. And I also agree, it's sort of remarkable, just the shutdown that I've seen. The extent of it, for whatever the excuse, it's very remarkable and interesting for all of its problems. It's very interesting. And it invites us again, maybe to a real freedom among each other. That would be my conclusion based on what Paul was talking about.
Benny, you've had your hand up a while.
Yeah. Well, I was particularly struck by the dead ends framework that Paul has brought to us, and it's just like, what is the, like, there's a machine, you know, that is operating at a high level, that the economy is of so much importance that any talk about it not mattering immediately discredits whatever else comes next inside of the machine of, you know what I'm saying. And it's almost as if, because of that phenomenon, calling any conversation about the economy a dead end is almost in itself, like, it's almost a dead end as well, because we have to work with the system to utterly transform it. And it's a paradox. It's like the paradox that we're trying to deal with right now. And I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what to do about it, because the economy is, up until now, been more important than everybody's lives, quality of lives. And even realistically, you know, next year doesn't matter. Tomorrow's, you know, stock market and tomorrow's unemployment rate is what matters. And here we have a situation where it's no longer tomorrow, right? It's as soon as this is over.
Yeah.
And so now we have a situation where, like, okay, what's happening right now is great. Like, from an environmental standpoint, right? Like, people staying home and being deprived of many things is actually a really good thing for the biosphere. It's really harmful for a lot of people's psychology. And gosh, where was I going with this? If there is an understanding that because it's good for the biosphere, like, oh, this is a really pivotal time for us, but everybody is thinking about, how do we go back to the economy, to being employees as our identity? And I don't know. I had this word come up for me that my dad is a retired financial advisor. That was his career. He was like, oh, anyways, he talks, when I try to learn about the economy from him, he talks about self-fulfilling prophecies. The stock market is now a self-fulfilling prophecy. Everything that happens on the stock market is self-fulfilling prophecies. And so I see, and I'm going to put this out here, and my invitation is like, we're trying to figure all this stuff out together. But I see two self-fulfilling prophecies that are battling right now. The first one is the economy, to put it simply. That the economy is humanity. Humanity is not human, it is the economy. The other self-fulfilling prophecy that I see at war with this one is generosity. Generosity. And as humanity is generosity, for giving. And both of these two, like with the economy, it's like, oh, you work and yada, 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 and you got to get, you got to earn what you get. And that's a lifestyle, and it's a prophecy. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Money funnels up to those whose parents had money and yada, yada. And then with generosity, there's a self-fulfilling prophecy there, where practicing generosity, trusting in the generosity of others, in that as the way of you continuing to get what you need and giving whatever there is to give, that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more people who participate in generosity and giving all that they can, the more people can live that way. And so, and it's like these two modalities of human life, I guess. Society. And they're at war right now. And we're in this pivotal time where it's like a limbo. What's next?
So, Francesca, I saw you were ready to make a comment, and I'll let you do that in just a second. But Benny, I'm going to just suggest a little shift in the way that you frame that, because when I listen to what you're saying, and you're spot on that there are these two things, and those self-fulfilling prophecies. Another way to think about that is in systems terms. These are reinforcing feedbacks. And it's not so much necessarily that then these two ideas of, the business as usual economy on the one side, and a generosity, or what Derek often refers to as the gift ecology sort of way of thinking about how we interact. Then what you're really talking about is two different attractors in the system, two different ways the system might be trying to fall, and that we're on this cusp where it could fall towards generosity, or it could fall back into the old pattern. And it's because it's on this cusp, a little nudge will make all the difference. So it's a really interesting time for that new beginning. So that was just me stealing the mic. Sorry, Francesca, go ahead.
I'm feeling very pessimistic today. Thorn, what happened to me? So I don't see any little nudges. I see major nudges, at least from the generosity end. And oh man, Kat. I just, there's this thing that, when is this going to be over, right? For especially the people that are suffering. Okay. When can we get back to the way things were? And then there are the people who have the luxury to be thinking and not just exhausted and hungry or whatever, or worried about getting sick because of exposure. We have the luxury of imagining these futures, but I don't know. It just seems to me that we're just puppets. That that the government, the people with money, everybody are watching all of this. They already are several steps ahead of us and know exactly what's going to happen. Yeah, so the stock market thing happened. People lost money, but I think the really moneyed people they already know how to get back to what their normal is. And I just, I don't see us having much power. And I hope I'm wrong, because damn, we've been talking for 2 weeks now about grabbing this and running with it and putting out our visions. But anyway.
I think if we could have enough discussion in depth, somehow on a, for instance, a national level, we had something like this, something like a citizens council, a series of them in this country, that a lot of this stuff is just going to, I mean, the money argument is going to have to stand up against an awful lot of considerations that are pretty naked right now. The people obviously we're concerned about are people who are vulnerable for health, but also the regular worker whose money situation may be in limbo. Most of us don't have savings anymore. Savings is a nice idea. I mean, you might have a little, but it's just kind of a nice idea that's not terribly realistic increasingly. So it's I think more than trying to prop that up, because something like this is going to happen again. It gives us an opportunity to talk about what really matters, what's important to us, what can we all agree on. And that argument always gets stopped with a money or a market argument. Oh, we can't let this go. If we let this go, I used to have this argument with a friend for years, and I realized that their ultimate worldview is that things are going to get bad, most of us are going to die, and the people who work hard will survive. That's his view. I mean, I think that's really what his religion and his politics, everything leads to the same thing. And I think that's just bullshit. I really do. It's just bullshit, unmitigated bullshit. Somebody who's become unhinged from reality. The problem is you have a lot of people in power who are equally unhinged. That's what you're talking about, the difficulty of, one, getting rid of a lot of, if not most or all of them, getting rid of these people. And I know these people are us too, but they're us in a very intensified, concentrated life that has found a way to shield itself from a great many things. So that's not going to work. So, and I am concerned about people without money. Of course we feel powerless. That's really how things are set up. What's Morrissey had an album called World Peace is None of Your Business. I think that's kind of, world peace is none of your business. Well, whose business is it? Literally, I guess that's the question. As my friend's political thing comes down, well, Bob, if we stop doing that, the Chinese will just move in. Before it was the Russians will move in, but the Chinese are doing a lot more trade stuff now. So that's the big danger. The Chinese will move in, but the Chinese people are having their own problems with trying to negotiate this their enormous culture and their enormous economy, and what their intentions for it are there are a lot of problems ahead. I mean, it's lifting a lot of people into a middle class level, but there are a lot of problems ahead. So we're not going to get out of this argument about generosity. It's another way of expressing our need to have real solidarity with each other to survive, just to survive. So I think maybe we need to talk a lot about that, about if you could design this society. Yes, I know you want to get back to your job, but if you could, what would make more sense to do? Maybe work fewer hours, and maybe have a few guarantees about health, and you have a roof over your head, and we're not going to starve to death or lack for clean water. Everybody in the world wants those things if they thought they could have them. And that seems like the important thing. We're not waiting to rent a shop in Elon Musk's mall on Mars. I don't think that's very realistic, you know. But I can understand why some people retreat to it as a possibility. Anyway.
Leoma, did you have an interjection?
No.
Okay.
Um,
And then Paul.
I think I would add to Benny's generosity, interconnection, and nature connection and in this little Capra way of looking at things that I was looking at this morning, which I'll hope to talk about more another time, that there are 4 perspectives that he's suggesting. We're looking at how dynamic, how life, how society are. And one of the 4 is meaning. That the meaning that we give things is this a tractor? Does make a difference in how we organize everything else. I note that I think one thing that we're on the edge of is with this, which makes movement into the direction of generosity and interconnection and nature connection challenging, is the threat of starvation and death from exposure, where people have no way to meet their needs. They can't go out into the forest and forage, and no way to build a shelter when they're kicked out by the landlord, which I'm going to be giving this is not a coherent thing. This is a thought dump, and that somehow the reality of ownership and the reality of things being organized so that the rich have a lot of the say in how things are done. I mean, there's going to be I don't think it's a time of a simple nudge, but it might be a time where we could start a direction. Well, a simple nudge, I mean, it's more like the flapping of the butterfly wings, which actually was a seagull originally, starting a new possibility. But another thing of Cowper's in this perspectives is how things are organized. I mean, there's the physical structures that are in place. There's how things are organized. You know, the kind of the patterns of organization. And another thing is the process, which is that's those loops, feedback loops, time moving in. That there are multiple ways to think how things might be worked in a different direction with a new meaning. The thing I liked about what Benny was saying was that if we start, and what Paul too, we start not with the dead ends, but we start with a new meaning and have some kind of a faith in it. Don't know where it would go. I mean, what Derek said about the 1% might be afraid they died suddenly occurred to me that might be one reason why this stop down happened, because they can insulate themselves. They could have insulated themselves but they probably actually couldn't have realistically insulated themselves without being so obvious about it that there would have been a rebellion. And if they don't insulate themselves totally, the virus is an equal opportunity killer and doesn't pay any attention to the stock market. So anyway, I'll stop for there.
Okay, Paul, go ahead. And then Derek and Nancy, haven't really heard from either of you in a while, but I just wanted to note that we've got about 15 minutes left for this call. So Paul, go ahead.
Well, I can see I should have prepared. Would have been good to have signed up for a later date. But I do want to make a couple suggestions, and I'll kick it right back to the rest of you. Suggestion one is that there is a bad habit, and we all have it, of assuming that we know what other people are thinking and feeling, and that habit goes with our habit of assuming that they're idiots most of the time, that we can count on them to do the worst possible thing that's on the table. This is, of course, not true. And because we are all living in the same extreme reality, and I don't think it's possible to overstate how extreme it is. So that with varying degrees of consciousness, we kind of all know the same things, you know, and if you don't believe that on some level, it kind of disqualifies you, I think, from being helpful, from being of use. I think that is one of the necessary generosities, to use these terms, is until proven otherwise, to try to assume the best and not the worst, and certainly to assume that if something is real and compelling and important to us, that on some level it probably is to most other people. About the economy, there's sort of my understanding of that is maybe something that I cannot expect to share widely, but everybody knows. They did a poll, 60% of America told the poll that the economy has no benefit whatsoever for anyone but a very powerful few. That's a 2019 poll. If you did it today, I bet it would be even higher. There's a reason for that. It's not that it was ever good, the thing we call the economy, but we made changes that were the opposite of what you would do if you were trying to make more well-being, make a more prosperous society. We made changes. We cut the top marginal rate way down, and we got rid of the limits on stock buybacks, and that was a formula for concentrating income and wealth, and it worked really rapidly. We had made 50 years of progress in reducing the concentration of wealth, and in only 25 years, we were right back to the peak concentration of wealth set in 1928. So whatever benign thing the economy may have kind of done at an earlier stage, it has not been benign. There has not been a way in which the economy was improving life for 40 years. It has been steadily the reverse. And the guy that I really think we all need to read, William Lazanick, Profits Without Prosperity, Harvard Business Review, who describes this so well, says, right, used to be companies were run for the purpose of adding something, adding value to society. Now they're run for the purpose of extracting value, of subtracting value from society. So GDP now is mostly an index or a measure of how much value has been taken out, not how much new value, new possibility, new whatever has been added. And of course, we're all having to work, many of us, if we're young, 2 or 3 jobs, just to satisfy basic life requirements that one 40-hour a week job was able to satisfy decades ago. So the possibilities of human life are contracting, is what the economy is doing. Our largest employer is Walmart. So let's not get too caught up in the idea that, oh, well, everyone's always going to believe that the economy is benign, because I don't think anyone believes that. And there's certainly not a defensible position that is true. Okay.
I'm happy to let Nancy go.
Oh, okay. Nancy, are you ready?
Yes and no. This has been so rich. I have so many thoughts that I find myself wanting to say almost nothing right now, but rather do some writing and come back perhaps to our next or soon conversation and walk through it more systematically. So thank you all. This has been very, very valuable.
And I'll just point out, Benny might well have missed my conversations about my tax business. And I framed it in terms of the current economy is based on scarcity and competition, and the world I envision is based on abundance, having what we need, which is what's truly important, and taking care of each other rather than competing with each other. But that can be easily summed up as generosity, and so I really resonate with that. So yeah, I've been having that conversation now for several months with hundreds of people, and it's going really well. We just need to get it presenced in the mainstream media. So.
Is there anybody?
I guess I do want to say one little thing, building on what Derek just said. The most core thing, I think I want to say to Francesca, the deep changes we're talking about will not happen overnight, and we won't totally know how they'll happen, but that doesn't mean it's beyond our power, because huge, deep changes in human society have occurred again and again. And the other is it partly turns on what question we're trying to answer or what we're aspiring to. And the question I ask and assert, it is possible to meet the needs of all by healing, not harming planet and people. That's a working assumption that then says how. How do we do that? And there's some sub-questions, and that leads into the stuff I'm going to write out, but I did want to at least have that as a point of departure.
Benny, did you have one more thing? And Francesca also.
Yeah, I think that I feel called to acknowledge the point that Paul felt he needed to reiterate based on what I had said. And yeah, this comes from a lot of humility on my part, is that I think that I'm just going to voice my interpretation, which is that one of the new beginnings is potentially the assumption that we're all aware of how non-beneficial and non-benign the economy is. And that's the starting point. The starting point that I voiced was not informed by that. And I think that's I was really touched. I feel like that's like a really potent starting point. And I need to like sit back and just kind of let that sink in, because it opens a lot of doors, and it doesn't really answer a lot of questions for me, but it kind of spins me around to look at them from a different side of the text. And yeah, I think that's what I want to voice right now. So thank you.
And then Francesca, and then Leoma. And if we can we need to start keeping it brief to really pay attention to the time, because I know Derek and I have another meeting coming up fairly soon. So we are going to have to end this pretty close to on time. So but go ahead, Francesca, and then Leoma.
Say that I think my pessimism today is looking at the short term. I think we could very easily rebound right back to where we were, where everybody's actually relieved that the economy is picking up and that they're relieved whatever leader they can get that will, get them back to where they were. At the same, so I think that's the short term. I think that we all share the same vision, and the possibilities. I'm just nervous for what's up ahead in the next few months. I think I'm the Pollyanna of the bunch, if anything. So I was a little out of character today, and I'm fearful. I'm also just seeing signs everywhere. I mean, literally signs. I was watching a video thing that somebody did of downtown Manhattan. People are writing things on windows and doors, hopeful messages. And so it's out there. And, I just hope we can harness it. That's all.
Leoma. Oh, Leoma, you're still muted.
Does the space bar work? To unmute?
Oh, there you go.
Okay. According to one take on the word emergence, the emergence into new possibilities, there's a period of chaos that precedes it. And according to my understanding of it, in order for the chaos to come up with good solutions, a good new place, we have to seed it. It needs to be seeded with meaning and organization and preparation. And I'm hearing from this conversation that one message of meaning that needs to go out or needs to connect with other people's understanding is that the economy, with its patterns of organization and its processes, are not bringing us the life we need. And that it is possible to find a way into a generous, a pattern of generosity, interconnection, sustainable with nature and ourselves, that the basic message is this doesn't work, but we can go through the chaos period to something that works by looking at this, taking the seeds of what's going on. It works. It's just in terms of metaphor, when a butterfly is in the chrysalis stage, everything breaks down except for these little things. I think they're called imaginal discs. The nervous system and the imaginal, they're these little seeds of the
Imaginal cells.
Imaginal cells, there you go. They're these seeds, and I think the nervous system may stay too, but I mean, they're these seeds. There's some structures that can blossom forth. So looking for that metaphorically, my Easter resurrection.
There you go. Well, that seems like a really, really appropriate and lovely theme to close on. I'm going to just quickly remind you that we have our next meeting tomorrow at 5:30, and that's still open topic-wise. So it feels like there's still a lot of energy around this. Nancy, I don't know if you would feel ready to step in and talk about that a little bit to get us going, or we can just see what emerges. Okay.
Let me put it this way. Yes, I would like to aim for that with the fallback. I'm not there. We still have a lot of good stuff that we're into the middle of, and we can pick up with it, or perhaps some other person will serve.
Just a moment, I'll be right there.
A readiness to do that. But right now I like the idea of my aiming for that at least.
Great. Okay. So that'll be tomorrow at 5:30. And then we'll have one more of, this round Tuesday at 1. Tuesday, a little later in the afternoon, I'm doing another lunar meditation, because we'll be precisely on the last quarter of the waning moon Tuesday afternoon. So that'll be from 3:30 to about 4:15, which will mostly be meditation with just a little time to say hello before and after. And then, those of you who are Patreon supporters, and here, let me get us into that. We're definitely going to be moving into a new phase of these discussions. They may not be every day. A lot of things we need to start talking about. We'll talk about that first with what we call the Circle of Agaya and Ubuntu for the Patreon supporters. And then I'm going to invite, if you can reach out to other people who maybe haven't been on the last few calls, but have been on previous calls, who might want to come in and talk about that. And that'll be a week from today. And I don't quite remember now what time, because that's in another window. But anyway, we're going to need help and support to keep these things going. So please reach out to people, let people know about Novasutras in general. And remember, there's a lot of content on the web. There's presence, not necessarily a lot of content or focus on many social media channels. So there are a lot of ways that you can learn more about Novasutras and what we're trying to build. So with that, and here I was going to just confirm. Oh, I didn't put that on that. So, and I think I sent out yesterday afternoon a little bit of a follow-up that hopefully everybody got. But if you didn't, please check your spam filter and add novasutras@gmail.com to your address book or whitelist or whatever you can do to try and not have our stuff go into your spam filter, because I communicate a lot through email. So we're already past time. I just would like to maybe have us drop in for just 1 minute of quiet, and then we'll kind of say a goodbye. Does that feel right to everybody? Okay. So here we go. So I just want to, again, just express so much gratitude for the incredible thoughtfulness and insight and generosity of spirit and feeling of fellowship and kinship and love that really seems to emerge from these discussions. I am so grateful that that I got talked into this and that we've been able to keep these happening as long as we have. And again, there's definitely a lot of energy behind making sure that this kind of thing is supported and gets to continue. So I'm unmuting everybody, and I just, if we all want to just drop in kind of, let's just do this sort of simultaneously. If you have a word or a little phrase that you just want to kind of drop into this community. So on the count of 3, 2, 1.
Trust.
Thank you. All right, so hold hands here for a moment and say goodbye and let you go if you need to go. All right, take care. Hope to see most of you
Be well.
tomorrow.